Right. Hello, Susan Craig. I'm introducing Susan Craig, and she's going to narrate the monologues from the Tales of Albert and Others, written by Marriott Edgar with illustrations by John Halsall. This was originally presented as a premiere at the Waterside Arts Centre on June the 8th at 8 o'clock. So I hope you enjoy this.
The Lion and Albert. There's a famous seaside place called Blackpool that's noted for fresh air and fun, and Mr. and Mrs. Ramsbottom went there with young Albert, their son. A grand little lad was young Albert, all dressed in his best, quite a swell, with a stick with the horse's head handle, the finest that Woolworths could sell. They didn't think much of the ocean, the waves was fiddling and small, there was no wrecks and nobody drownded, fact nothing to laugh at all. So seeking for further amusement, they paid and went into the zoo, where there were lions and tigers and camels, and old ale and sandwiches too. There were one great big lion called Wallace, his nose were all covered with scars, he lay in a somnolent posture, with the side of his face on the bars. Now Albert had heard about lions, how they were ferocious and wild. To see Wallace lying so peaceful, well, it didn't seem right to the child. So straightway the brave little fellow, not showing a morsel of fear, took his stick with the horse's head handle and pushed it in Wallace's ear. You could see that the lion didn't like it, for giving a kind of a roll, he pulled Albert inside the cage with him and swallowed the little lad whole. Then Pa, who had seen the occurrence and didn't know what to do next, said, "Mother, yon lion's at Albert." And Mother said, "Well, I am vexed." Then Mr. and Mrs. Ramsbottom, quite rightly when all's said and done, complained to the animal keeper that the lion had swallowed their son. The keeper was quite nice about it. He said, "What a nasty mishap. Are you sure that it's your boy is eaten?" Pa said, "Am I sure? There's his cap." The manager had to be sent for. He came and he said, "What's to do?" Pa said, "Yon lion's at Albert, and him in his Sunday clothes too." Then Mother said, "Right's right, young feller. I think it's a shame and a sin for a lion to go and eat Albert after we've paid to come in." The manager wanted no trouble. He took out his purse right away, saying, "How much to settle the matter?" And Pa said, "What do you usually pay?" Next picture. But Mother had turned a bit awkward. When she thought where her Albert had gone, she said, "No, someone's got to be summons." So that was decided upon. Then off they went to the police station, in front of the magistrate chap. They told him what happened to Albert, and proved it by showing his cap. The magistrate gave his opinion that no one was really to blame, and he said that he'd hoped the Ramsbottoms would have further sons to their name. At that Mother got proper blazing. "And thank you, curse kindly," she said. What, waste all our lives raiding children to feed ruddy lions? Not me.
That's it, is it? Oh, God.
The Return of Albert. You've heard how young Albert Ramsbottom in the zoo at Blackpool one year, with a stick with an horse's head handle, gave a lion a poke in the ear. The name of the lion was Wallace. The poke in the ear made him wild, and before you could say Bob's your uncle, he'd up and he'd swallowed the child. He was sorry the moment he'd done it. With children he'd always been chums, and besides he'd no teeth in his noddles, and he couldn't chew Albert on't gums. He could feel the lad moving inside him as he lay on his bed of dried ferns, and it might have been little lad's birthday. He'd wished him such happy returns. But Albert kept kicking and fighting till Wallace arose feeling bad, and felt it were time that he'd started to stage a comeback for the child. So with his head down in a corner, on his front paws he started to walk, and he coughed and he sneezed and he gargled, till Albert shot out like a cork. Old Wallace felt better directly, and his figure once more became lean, but the only difference with Albert was his face, and his hands were quite clean. Meanwhile Mr. and Mrs. Ramsbottom had gone home to tea feeling blue. Ma says, I feel down in the mouth like. Pa says, aye, I bet Albert does too. Said Ma, it just goes for to show you that the future is never revealed. If I thought we was going to lose him, I'd have not had his boots soled and heeled. Let's look on the bright side, said Father. What can't be helped must be endured. Every cloud has a silvery lining, and we did have young Albert insured. A knock at that door came that moment, as Father these kind words did speak. 'Twas the man from t' Prudential. He'd called for his twopence per person per week. When Father saw who had been knocking, he laughed, and he kept laughing so that the young man said, What's there to laugh at? Pa said, You'll laugh and all when you know. Excuse him for laughing, said Mother, but really things happen so strange. Our Albert's been ate by a lion. You've got to pay us for a change. Said the young fellow from the Prudential, Now come, let's understand this. You don't mean to say that you've lost him? Ma says, Oh no, I know where he is. When the young man had heard all the details, a bag from his pocket he drew, and he paid them with interest and bonus the sum of £9, 4 and 2. Pa had scarce got his hand on the money when a face at the window they see, and Mother said, Hey, look, it's Albert, and Father says, Aye, it would be. Young Albert came in all excited and started his story to give, and Pa said, I'll never trust lions again, not as long as I live. The young fellow from the Prudential to pick up the money began, and Father said, Hey, just a moment, don't be in a hurry, young man. Then giving young Albert a shilling, he said, Pop off back to the zoo. Here's your stick with the horse's head handle. Go and see what the tigers can do. Runcorn Ferry. On the banks of the Mersey, over on Cheshire side, lies Runcorn that's best known to fame by transport a bridge as takes folk over its stream, or else brings 'em back across same. In days afore transport a bridge were put up, a ferry boat lay in the slip, and old Ted the boatman would row folks across at twopence per person per trip. Now Runcorn lay on one side of stream, and witness on t'other side stood, and as nobody wanted to go either place, well, the trade wasn't any too good. One evening, to Ted's superlative surprise, 3 customers came into view, a Mr. and Mrs. Ramsbottom it were, and Albert, their little son, too. How much for the 3? Mr. Ramsbottom asked, and to his pocket did tip. Ted said, Same for 3 as it would be for 1. per twopence, per person, per trip. You're not charging twopence for that little lad, said mother, her eyes flashing wild. Per twopence, per person, per trip, answered Ted. Per woman, per man, or per child. 5 pence for 3, that's the most that I'll pay, said father. Don't waste time into talk. Per twopence, per person, per trip, answered Ted, and them as can't pay has to walk. Oh, said father. Come, mother, it's none too deep, t' weather's quite mild. So into the water the 3 of them stepped, the father, the mother, the child. The further they paddled, the deeper it got, but they wouldn't give up once begun. In the spirits that made Lancashire what she is, they'd sooner be drownded than done. Very soon the old couple were up to their necks, and the little lad clean out of sight. Said father, "Where's Albert?" And mother replied, "I've got hold of his hand, he's all right." 'Twere just at that moment pa got an idea, and floundering back to old Ted, he said, "We've walked that way, come take us the rest for half price, that's a penny a head." But Ted wasn't standing for none of that there, and making an obstinate lip. "Per twopence, per person, per trip," Ted replied. "Per trip, or per part of per trip." "All right then," said father. "Let me take the boat and I'll pick up the others halfway. I'll row them across and I'll bring the boat back, and 3 into bargain I'll pay." "'Twere money for nothing," Ted answered. "Right-o," and father got hold of the sculls. With the sharp end up boat towards middle of stream, he were there in a couple of pulls. He got mother out, it were rather a job. With the water she weighed 1/2 a ton. Then pushing the oar down the side of the boat, started fishing around for his son. When poor little Albert came up to the top, his collar was soggy and limp, and with holding his breath at the bottom so long, his face was red as a shrimp. Pa took them across, and he brought the boat back, and he said to old Ted on the slip, "Wilt thou row me across by myself?" Ted said, "Aye, at per twopence, per person, per trip." When they got to the side, father laughed fit to bust. He'd got best a bargain, you see. He'd worked it all out, and he got his own way, and he paid nowt but 5 pence for 3. The Jubilee Sov'rin. On Jubilee Day the Ramsbottoms asked all their relations to tea, including young Albert's grandmother. An awkward old party was she. She'd seen Queen Victoria's Jubilee and a wedding to Albert the Good, and got quite upset when young Albert asked how she got on in the flood. She cast quite a damper on the party, but cheered up a bit after tea, and gave Albert a real golden sovereign as she'd saved since the last Jubilee. It had a picture of Queen on one side and a dragon fight on the reverse, and it tasted of camphor and cobwebs through being so long in her purse. Albert cuddled the coin and he kissed it, and he felt the rough edge with his tongue, 'cause he knew by the look on his father it wouldn't be his very long. "Shall I get your money box, Albert?" said mother, all coaxing and sweet, and Albert let drop an expression he must have picked up in the street. "I'll show you a trick with yon sovereign," said pa, who were hovering near. Then he took it and pretended to eat it, and brought it back out of his ear. Well, this magic filled Albert with wonder, and before you could say Uncle Dick, he'd got the coin back from his father, and he'd performed the first part of the trick. When they saw as he'd swallowed his sovereign, with excitement his relatives burned, and each one suggested a process for getting the money returned. Some were for fishing with tweezers, some were for shaking it out. They said if they only got back a few shillings, that'd be better than nowt. They tried holding Albert head downwards and giving his back a good thump. Then his uncle, who worked for a chemist, said, "There's nowt for it but stomach pump." Well, they hadn't a stomach pump handy, but pa did the best that he could with a bicycle pump he had borrowed, but that weren't a ha'porth of good. At the finish they sent for the doctor, who looked down his throat through a glass and said, "Aye, This'll mean operation. I'm afraid he'll have to have gas." "How much is this going to cost us?" said Pa, beginning to squirm. Said the doctor, "It comes quite expensive. The gas will be 18p a therm. Then there's my time, 4 shillings an hour. You can't do these things in 2 ticks. By rights I should charge you a guinea, but I'll do it for 18 and 6. "What, 18 and 6 to get Sov'rin?" said Father. "That doesn't make sense. Tell you what, you best keep Albert and give me the odd 18p." The doctor concurred this arrangement, and to this day remains in some doubt as to whether he's in 18 shillings or whether he's 18p out. The Hole in the Ark. One evening at dusk, as Noah stood on his ark, putting green oil in starboard side lamp, his wife came along and said, "Noah, something's wrong. Our cabin is getting quite damp." Noah said, "Is that so?" Then he went down below, and he found it were right what she'd said, for there on the floor quite a puddle he saw. It was slopping around under t' bed. Said he, "There's an hole in the bottom somewhere. We must find it before we retire." Then he thought for a bit, and he said, "Aye, that's it. A bloodhound is what we require." So he went and he fetched bloodhound from place where it lay, between the skunk and the polecat it were, and as things there below were a trifle so-so, it were glad of a breath of fresh air. They followed the hound as it went sniffing around, till at last they located the leak. 'Twere a small hole in its side about 2 inches wide, where a swordfish had poked in its beak. And by gum, how the wet squirted in through that hole, while young Shem, who at sums were expert, worked it out on his slate that it came at the rate of per gallon per second per squirt. The bloodhound tried hard to keep water in check by lapping it up with his tongue, but it came in so fast through that hole that at last he shoved in his nose for a bung. The poor faithful bloodhound, he were very near drowned. They dragged him away none too soon, for the stream as it rose pushed its way up his nose and blew him out like a balloon. And then Mrs. Noah shoved her elbow in t' hole and said, "Eh, it's stopped, I believe." But they found very soon as she'd altered her tune, for the water had gone up her sleeve. When she saw as her elbow weren't doing much good, she said to Noah, "I've an idea. You sit on the leak, and by t'end of the week there's no knowing weather may clear." Noah didn't think much to this notion at all, but reckoned he'd give it a try. On the hole down he flopped, and the leaking all stopped, and all except him was quite dry. They took him his breakfast and dinner and tea, as day after day there he sat, till the rain were all past, and they landed at last on top side of Mount Ararat. And that is how Noah got 'em all safe ashore. But ever since then, strange to tell, them as helped save the ark has all carried a mark, aye, and all their descendants as well. That's why a dog has a cold nose, and ladies cold elbows. You'll also find, if you inquire, that that's why a man takes his coat tails in hand and stands with his back to the fire. The Recumbent Posture. The day after Christmas, young Albert were what's called confined to his bed, with a tight kind of pain in his stomach and a light feeling up in his head. His parents were all of a fluster when they saw little lad was so sick. They said, "Put out your tongue." When they'd seen it, they said, "Put it back again quick." Ma made him a basin of gruel, but that were a move for the worse. Though the little lad tried hard to eat it, at the finish he did the reverse. The pain showed no signs of abating, so at last they got doctor to call. He said it were in the abdomen and not in his stomach at all. He sent up a bottle of physic with instructions on t' label to say to be took in a recumbent posture, 1 teaspoonful 3 times a day. As Ma stood there reading the label, Pa started to fidget about. He said, "Get a 2-teaspoon and dose him before he gets better without." "I can manage the teaspoon," said Mother, a look of distress on her face. "It's this here recumbent posture. I haven't got one in the place." Said Pa, "What about Mrs. Lupton next door? Here, you'd better ask her. A woman who's buried 3 husbands is sure to have one of them there." So they went round and asked Mrs. Lupton. "Aye, I know what you mean," she replied. "I had got one on order for Horace, but poor dear got impatient and died." She said, "You'd best try the Co-op shop. They'll have one in stock, I dare say. Fact, I think I saw one in the window last time I were passing that way." So round they went to Co-op shop, and at counter for household supplies Pa asked for a recumbent posture, and the shopman said, "Yes, sir, what size?" Said Ma, "It's for our little Albert. I don't know what size he would use. I know he takes 13 in collars and 6s for fitting in shoes." "If it's little lad's size you are wanting," said the shopman, "I'm sorry to say we've nowt but one in the building, and that one was sold yesterday." He sent them across to Tinsmith, who said, "I know what you've in mind. If you'll draw me a pattern I'll make one." But Pa'd left his pencil behind. They tried every shop they could think on. They walked for 2 hours by the clock, and though most places reckoned to keep one, none of them had one in stock. The last place they tried was a chemist's. He looked at them both with a frown, and told them a recumbent posture were Latin and meant lying down. "They're not dosing my lad with Latin," said Mother, her face looking grim. "Just plain castor oil all he's getting, and I'm leaving the posture to him."